Awesome. So apologies for sending out the agenda a little bit later, but I did send it out Friday afternoon for those of y'all. We just wanted to give a couple quick updates regarding the membership and communications experience. So as of this morning, I just lost the email. We're at over 350 renewals so far, so we've surpassed the quarter mark, which considering this process goes through October. We're really happy with the numbers. There is a dashboard report that I will work with Jenna to figure out how to give some of these kind of quarterly updates. You will receive one with the board report that you'll get in July, but if there's more specific questions. Currently, it looks like Helen Grace is winning with 100 institutions in there. I will say that is out of 336 though, so she's not percentage-wise doing the best. Quick math, Chris, I think you might 43 of your 100. Yeah, looks like Chris, percentage-wise in the lead. But again, we're still very early in the process regarding institutional renewals. We'll be sending, or Jordana and Jenna have been working with your membership coordinators in where y'all will key in the process. And again, that's usually around August. Currently as well, there's the thank you note that y'all have been sending out regarding institutional renewals. I will say that we internally are having some larger conversations around how we better innovate within the processes that currently exist. I think institutional renewals is just one of those key areas that it just kind of exists, and it's going well. We do well. We have over a 90% renewal rate, but where can we be more creative in the process? So, for example, Helen, Grace, and Terry, how do we give y'all a list of do a cross analysis of who's coming to your regional conference and then who hasn't renewed yet, and how can we use that in-person meeting? Or for those of you that have summer board meetings, how do we capitalize off of those meetings? So again, we're figuring out internally the processes to create that, but more information will be forthcoming in that area. Tied with institutional renewals as well, internally we're looking at the recruitment areas as far as what makes sense and how recruitment ties on the institutional level. I think we've tended to think about recruitment from an individual level, but obviously 10 individual members versus one institutional member, depending on the institutional member, might have more impact. So what does that institutional renewal process look like? How do we best partner with your membership coordinators or membership directors within your region to make sure it aligns with what you're thinking about? And how do we get a sense really of what really is our market and how well are we doing within that market? So we're doing some analysis, and I'm working with Courtney Patterson, our Senior Director of Information Management, to get a sense of, well, what's in IPEDS, where currently do we have members, where don't we have members, and then how do we best share that information with y'all? So more information forthcoming, I think, and in particular, possibly in our in-person meeting in July, but definitely, we can get a sense afterwards what that looks like moving forward. Amy, anything to add from the institutional renewal perspective from your end?
No, I mean, as you said, it's going really well. I mean, this runs like a well-oiled machine at this point here, which is fabulous. And we're sitting today on June 10th, and memberships don't actually officially expire till June 30th. So we're seeing a really good response to kick things off, and I'm looking forward to see where it goes from here.
Two additional things that we are working on internally is one is getting a sense of who are those newer members or individuals that maybe don't come from the field. So Helen Grace sits in Region 3, and I forget the specific institution. Courtney's going to look it up, but I think it's an individual, Eastern Kentucky, Western Kentucky, somewhere that maybe was an alum of the program or alum of the school, then was working and like the director of arts affairs or something like that, and then now is coming and they're the voting delegate of the institution. So they don't necessarily know NASPA, or they might not have the field, and that's probably less frequent, but it is happening. So how do we better share information about NASPA? And then additionally, kind of related to that, how do we better share information with institutional members, voting delegates, the benefits of NASPA? So at Region 2 and 3, we did a morning session about learning more about your NASPA benefits. We had a mighty 4 that showed up there, but 2 of the individuals, we just talked about, well, the Rev team is more than happy to do a live briefing at your next divisional meeting to talk about NASPA and all the benefits and those sorts of things. So they're like, oh, you're willing to do that? And we're like, yeah, of course, we've done that before. Shanna, I know that Danny and Jordana helped with the serve overview of NASPA last week. So I think we're trying to figure out better ways to market the internal resources to help y'all talk about NASPA on your campuses. Yeah, Chris, I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, I apologize if this doesn't happen already, but is there any communication from NASPA that goes to like the presidents and CEOs of the campuses that where there's membership? Just even like a thank you for your support type message?
That's an interesting thought. Amy, have we done
nothing systematized?
Right.
Yeah, our focus, as we've been tracking presidents, we tend to communicate more with presidents who come out of student affairs, which is like talking to our own, which is not necessarily the best approach if you're thinking about expanding reach. So that's a great idea, something for us to consider.
Yeah. And some of that's self-serving too. There was like an annual letter that came from NASPA at the renewal back to the CEO saying, thank you for your commitment to student affairs. Oh, by the way, here's where NASPA is a leader in higher education. That's win-win for everybody.
Yeah, we've done it. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, and I know we just came back from our regional board meeting in Iowa a couple weeks ago, and we really focused on community colleges. That's our focus, and trying to help community colleges understand the benefits of NASPA, just trying to introduce them to NASPA so that we can be better partners and that we can learn from them. So it's not always like we're telling them what they should be doing in the field, but how do we work together to advance the work of higher education for all. And so we are going to be spending some time and crafting some real poignant letters and having some face-to-face conversations with community colleges to help them understand how we can partner better.
That's awesome, Danita. And is your regional community college division rep engaged in that too?
Oh yeah, Melissa is definitely, because we wanted to start a Wednesday webinar series, and they already have one. The community college system in the region already has something established.
Oh, cool.
How can we connect and co-sponsor some programs?
I love that.
Yeah.
One of the things that Kim Lowry, I mean, and I know she's come join these calls a couple of times, but to talk more about the professional development, educational program side of things. But, she within the division has been talking for a long time about what we as an organization might need to do to approach community college membership a little bit differently, recognizing that most community colleges are structured differently. Their student affairs departments look different than a four-year campus. And so I think there's some work on our part to be done there, which, would go hand in hand with the outreach that y'all are doing.
Can I also mention, Nathan and Amy, I don't know if our Austin conference, since our state institutions in California won't be funding that attendance, if that's going to impact our membership. So I think we'll just need to keep an eye on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And where else are we engaging people who live in California, whether it's the Connected Conference, which we're running, in conjunction with it, or in other places, since we do know that membership and event registration are so closely tied. But it's all of our events and programs, not just the annual conference. So it's a good point, Candy. We definitely need to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, Chris, I think to your earlier comment, the only president communication we've done before is regarding the Excellence Awards process. And we've usually let an institution know, in addition to the voting delegate, that the award won. But we definitely can, it's an interesting comment. And
the thing about.
Yeah. And then Danita, I think, as Melissa and Tamika work, they'll definitely keeping Jordana in the loop, because I think there might be some, depending on how robust the communications y'all want to get, there might be some ways that we could utilize some of our tools internally to see tracking and click-throughs and open rates and all of those sorts of pieces as we get a sense of what non-member institutions in particular that y'all want to target and work towards.
That'd be good. Thanks.
Awesome. So kind of institutional memberships going. And again, that'll just be a standard topic just to give y'all an update on where things are with there. I sent an email last week regarding the membership dashboards, and I know, Danita, apologies, because I know y'all were the region that was most impacted with getting the information in a timely manner, but we are working to revamp, I think, what that membership process looks like in the dashboards. It's clear that historical information is something that is needed from y'all, the ability to kind of drill down where appropriate. But really, I think the feedback that Amy and I have been getting from our colleagues is how does that data that you need tie to actionable goals within your region? So, Danita, I think the focus on community colleges is a clear example. And now I can go back and say, well, this region is really focusing on this. This is the information they need. These are the action steps that they're moving forward. And Shanna, I know Alyssa has that on the agenda for your board meeting, but kind of as y'all continue with your conversations with your advisory board, or as you look to your strategic plans moving forward, some clearer goals or some metrics at least tied to where you're hoping to move towards, I think will help us and help me work to evolve the membership dashboard in a way that's helpful. The emails or the attachments that you receive, so those Excel spreadsheets, that's pretty much, Amy, since you've been here, right? So I mean, I think that's been how we've tracked membership on a month-to-month basis. And Courtney, again, our Senior Director of Information Management, and then Alexis Wisar, our Senior Director of Data Information, and I are working on kind of what a revamped tool would look like, what some additional information. We'll definitely tie in your membership directors and y'all on future calls, so know that we're not creating this in a vacuum. But I did just want to share that apologies that we weren't able to get too revamped information for your summer board meetings, but I am hopeful, I think, by your October, November meetings that we should be able to have some updated information for your boards to kind of chew over in your in-person meetings in the fall. And then just as a reminder, your weekly membership dashboards, those will continue to come out. If there are other individuals that should receive those, or how that information gets shared, we know the PDF function is one of the issues with it currently, but if you'd like us to add an additional person to those communications, or additional people, just let me know, and I'll work with Courtney to get that updated. Tied with that, I think, is the data privacy and kind of connections with that. And, I think we are safe as an organization when it is in aggregate information that exists out there. But when we drill down to the individual level, I think that's where some of the tension lies. So I think when we have our goals, that can draw direct correlation or direct links for why you need drill down information, or how we can best support, we being internal staff, can best support your initiatives, versus, unfortunately, Danita, to use the community college example again, we're not going to be able to give out iPads information for the voting delegates for those, X number of community college members that are there. However, we definitely want to create systems that you can still communicate, work with those individuals, track those individuals, etc. So that's really, I think, the tension that we're facing, and internally over the next 2 to 3 months, right, Amy? Give or take, we'll be rolling out some updates to the membership database. So how individuals update their profile, what information is in their profile, them giving affirmative consent, not just implicit consent, that we can market to them or share their information. So there will be implications that we're still figuring out internally, but once Danny and I get a sense of what those implications look like, we'll definitely bring back to this call and to the other volunteer leaders. One direct impact that I know right now, and Danny is figuring out the communication, is your exhibitor reports at your regional conferences probably will be smaller. Because individuals will have to actively opt in to receive solicitation from exhibitors. That being said, I think we're figuring out also internally that communication to the exhibitors, that they're getting the people that want to hear from them, though. So hopefully, even though the list might be smaller, it theoretically should be a better list for their follow-up communications. So again, I think those sorts of pieces we're figuring out internally, because we're experiencing it as well on our events. But did just want to give a head up that will be some additional conversation to be had over the next couple months.
And Nathan, one thing I'm pushing my membership chair on, and I'm hoping this is part of on the radar of these reports and stuff like that, is the peer analysis, because like the things that we're talking about from a regional perspective is like okay, 10% of our regions is represented in this KC. Is that, well, how does that compare to the other regions? To look for that representation stuff. So the more and more
a good point.
do some peer comparisons across regions and stuff like that. That's why I really like, because the data is great without that type of training to sit there and see where I think that's gonna be the real power in terms of tying action plans to back to the national strategic plan as we start doing our regional reports or our national board reports. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. I think, and that will come up in the continuing the conversation, but I think there has been I don't know if an active discouragement, but there has not been the willingness, I think, among regional directors to share some of this information in a global capacity, or at least among kind of other board members. And, Amy and I just want to reconfirm that is not the case anymore with this set of regional directors. But I think the NASPA Gives is a good example where I think there's ways to drill down specifically within your region, but you can get a sense of globally what is the overarching NASPA Gives process, but then how does each region fare? So we can definitely work towards that.
The middle ground is almost like, what's the national average? Even if I knew what the national average was across all of NASPA and certain subgroups, right? That would be even helpful too, as opposed to, because I understand the tension might be you don't want to create unhealthy competition, and you don't want to start creating rankings, the pseudo rankings of what's the best regions. But even having comparative data to the national average, I think would be good for strategic planning for the regions.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we've had kind of a friendly competition, even on, members of the region are going to the conference and, the NASPA Gives and some of those things. And I do think that's been a friendly competition for the most part in the past. But I think with that, having some maybe measurement data with that, what does that mean? If Region 1 has this many people at the conference versus Region 4 West has this many people at the conference, it's not really a straight apples to apples comparison, especially depending on what the conference is and how many members we have and all of that. So
certainly not head count, but the more you get aggregate that into like proportionalities, right? 20% of this region versus 10% of that region, that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that drill down. So, for example, Helen Grace is ahead for institutions. So, but giving that context that she's ahead in pure numbers, but percentage-wise, it adds a different context to it. So, yep, absolutely, we can take a sense and build that into the process for what it looks like moving forward.
With the GDPR, what have we done as far as vendors to let them know that things may be looking different in the future, and this is why?
So far, we have not done anything, but we will be communicating with them at large and can provide you with that same language to do it at the regional level, since it impacts every exhibitor, sponsor, vendor thing that we do organization-wide. So we'll keep you posted on that and send you suggested language that you can use at whatever point in your timeline is appropriate.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful, probably sooner rather than later. We're already looking for vendors and have some locked in for the fall regional conference.
Yep, we can get back to you on that.
Okay.
Awesome. Great. So I just wanted to, if there aren't any questions about membership communication, give a quick update regarding some email communications. And these are pretty far back, but just wanted to raise to your note. We are clarifying the RingCentral process for those of you that are using it for your region. So it will be $10 a month. And it will be billed at the start of, so next month, for the following for the full fiscal year. So it is a little bit cheaper than RingCentral, which where we were previously using. And Amy and I just wanted to kind of clarify just from a billing perspective rather than doing each month, because most likely you're going to keep it if you're going to keep it for the year. Again, as a reminder, this is not a requirement as far as what you are using for your communication tools, but it is an additional opportunity for what we have for y'all to use. Regarding Socio, so again, that's the NASPA mobile app. Danny has been in communications with all of your conference chairs, but it is $650 for the over 200 downloads, and I believe it's $300 for less than 200 downloads. And all that we will need is just an email confirmation from your conference chair that you are interested in using RingCentral, or excuse me, Socio as your mobile app. I believe we're all set for all of the fall conferences, but like Chris for Utah, for example, or some of your state drive-ins, if you're interested in using, again, it would be that $300 mark. And then we have a robust training module for those of you that are interested in using it. And from what I heard from 2-3, it's a pretty user-friendly kind of admin tool, and their support staff is really awesome as far as getting that information back. And then finally, for the events approval process, so apologies, Danny and I were in miscommunication who was going to send out the email, but later this week, you will receive an email about our proposed events approval process. Again, as a reminder, we brought this up on our previous calls, but there are just a lot of places that people are getting events approved, and we want to clarify that once we hear internally, it has gone through your process, that you have that you approve it as the regional director, your treasurer is aware of it. You're not planning a last-minute event with only 3 weeks of knowledge. This is in particular for events where we will be getting registration, but one of the larger conversations I think internally we're figuring out, and then we'll bring back to y'all, is now that we're able to track how a member engages with the organization, it might behoove us to track as much information about a member as possible. So if there are free drive-ins, the critical conversations, for example, Shanna, how are we getting that information back within the NASPA database? How do we kind of, again, even though it's not a paid item, if there are live briefings or webinars or those sorts of kind of engagement activities, maybe your state directors are doing meetups or drive-ins, how do we track that information, and how do we just get that in the system? And again, with this new engagements module, it's freeing up some information, but we just need to figure out what that process looks like. So again, Danny will send out a note later this week with the kind of next steps. And our goal would be to start using this on any events that we don't know about already, starting next fiscal year, so starting July 1. So Terry, for example, we already know about the Veterans KC conference, so we wouldn't need that approval process. But if there's a new KC event that's coming up, those are the sorts of things that we want to start tracking. Great. That's kind of the email communications, and we'll follow up from there. So continuing the RGTF task force conversation, again, for all of us were in Los Angeles to kind of talk through, and kind of there was that final report that Julie gave kind of to the board, but Amy and I kind of wanted to revisit that, and Candy, if you wouldn't mind just kind of sharing some of the information that kind of from your perspective.
Talked about. Sure.
Yeah.
So Nathan and Amy asked if I would take some leadership around the next phase of this particular conversation, and I said that I would. The meetings so far that we've had just as regional directors have been an outgrowth of the Regional Governance Task Force. And so one of the things that really we want to do is sort of put to bed the fact that this is post-task force, and this is now really just our ongoing work, we think. Mm-hmm. So that's something I would just make explicit. And then if you look at the last document that we produced, that we gave to the board in March, and that is the last document that Nathan sent in the attachments for this meeting. For those of us that helped to write that, I think it'll come back pretty easily. For those of you that are new in your positions, you'll want to take a look at that. And so just as a quick reminder, the Regional Task Force first started, how many years has it been now? 6, 7, 8?
Yeah, it was 2013 was the very first conversation.
Right. And so there's a whole bunch of back documents, which Nathan has included in the invitation for this meeting today, which again, if you're new to the role, I would encourage you to review. You don't need to, I think, memorize every word of that, but just have a general sense of where we've been. And then I feel like where we landed, and for those of you that were in all of these meetings, please add your 2 cents, but where we landed was a set of principles and then a set of actions that we want to take moving into the future. And so the document that we presented to the board in March talks about some of that background and history, and I'm looking at it, talks about the process that we've used kind of to date, a decision-making framework, broader issues that we want to focus on. And then it really gives some recommendations for things that we want to pay attention to next. And so I'm on that section, initial recommendations. And the first one is the onboarding and training pieces that we, as regional directors over the last few years, we've given a lot of suggestion and recommendation to the national office about how we would like them to structure and help us structure onboarding and training for our leaders and for us. And so Nathan and Amy and Danny are leading those efforts. And then another big piece has been the finance. And this is the part that I feel like I can help us guide some conversation. Mm-hmm. So when we met last December in DC and then again in LA, we were beginning to talk, and again, second year RDs, please add your 2 cents. But I think we were beginning to talk maybe in a way that's more open than had happened in past years about being willing to share information about what our regional budgets look like and how we spend money. And there's even, a list of issues to be addressed under number 2 in that section. And we've already started doing some of this: speaker honorarium, registration fees, meals at events, sponsorship, etc. And not with the idea that we have to be all standardized, but at least to share information about how we do it in our region so that we can do some norming and kind of see, are we really, off the track here, or yes, people are doing it the way that we're doing it. Another big one is volunteer compensation, what we pay for as a region. And so I think we're at the point where it's time to start to share some details. And that's what I would hope that we could do in this summer when we get together in Austin. Now let me kind of stop there and ask, for those that have been in your position for the last year and a half, are there other thoughts you would add?
I think, Candy, you nailed it. I think we're at a point where we've talked about process quite a bit, and so we're ready just to kind of get in the weeds and share some information with folks and determine, I don't know if best practice is the word, but common practice.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think a shared experience, if somebody were to go from region to region, certainly there will be cultures that are different from region to region, but as far as, benefits or expectations, there should be some commonality, I would think.
Right.
One of the things that we're having a lot of conversation about right now is scholarships for either regional or national conferences. And that certainly seems like that should be something that should be a little more standardized from region to region. I don't know that I want to have and have not regions.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. So let me talk about how this might happen. And I think we have a couple of options. And again, I'm being very transparent because I usually am. So when we got to this point in the conversation, Nathan and Amy said, well, we could certainly provide support by making, copies or making available to you everybody's budgets that are in what's the name of the software?
Intact.
That are in Intact. And I said, it's not that I don't want people, honestly, I don't care who sees my budget in Intact, but I don't really even know Intact. I'll be honest with you. I rely on my treasurer to do that work. I would just need to learn how to navigate that. And I don't know exactly how my budget is set up in Intact and how that relates to how I operationalize my budget. Yeah. And so one of the ways that we could certainly do this sharing is to look at each other's Intact sheets, or we could bring regional budgets and share those even hard copy, or we could not look necessarily at budgets laid out, but we could go issue by issue and talk about how we spend money. Mm-hmm. And so I'd love some feedback about what we think is the best approach of how to structure the conversation.
Well, and one note I'll just add to this is, so what you already are getting at the board meetings is the summary level information of everybody's financial reports. That was a change we made maybe a year ago, I want to say, in reporting on the association's finances at large. There was a desire to have the region's finances attached to that, which makes sense since they all roll up to the same 990 and audit. So those are being provided right now. And so you see them, the language we use for that, you see them as at a departmental level. So we think of departments as ways of segmenting your business. So it would be maybe your regional conference or board meetings or however y'all have decided to do that. What you're not getting is the detail that goes within it. So you may see a regional conference line, that's $100,000, but what is included in that $100,000 is not what we're showcasing at those board meetings. So what we would look to do here potentially, and what we have the ability to do, is to drill down on that so that there's more transparency there.
Right. And there's also, I want to acknowledge the complexity of having regional conference budgets as separate and apart from regional operating budgets, perhaps. I mean, again, I don't know how everybody structures it, so.
I'm glad we're talking about it, because one thing I did want to bring up today was kind of related to this. If there's an area as a new RD with a new treasurer coming in where I think there needs to be some standardization, it's on the budgeting stuff, because our treasurer, who's got onboarded from our outgoing treasurer, he's calling me, asking me questions like, well, how do we use this account for this account, that account, this account? I'm like, you tell me, Sean. And I finally sat there and said, do you treasurers in the region get together routinely? He's like, not yet. And so that's one thing I talked to Kenny about last week, is I think it's time that our treasurers start meeting so they can compare notes and develop best practices.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And we, where we are today is actually far more standardized than we were 6 or 7 years ago.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And everybody is at least using the same chart of accounts.
Well, they should be using the same type of practices, because one of the things that where we gotten ourselves into a little bit bugaboo as Region 5 with the WRC, with us having to take a loss, is that we've always budgeted our conference revenues in the current fiscal year. We've always had a luxury of a large reserve to cover that. We've never had a loss, right? So we're having to rethink about how we actually budget our conference revenues into future conference years. And the other thing too is, like, we're going to have more groups going to want to do their own events that might generate revenue too. So, I'd like to know the consistency in terms of what's considered, subgroups money versus a regional money from that perspective. So the more standardization on the budget side, I think it'd be welcomed from my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll just own that that system that you just mentioned, Candy. Yeah, I've never heard of it, never used it.
Yeah, I know it exists, but I've never.
We get the reports.
Yeah, that's, any kind of budget that I look at, actually, I think is a shared Google Doc that they pull all of the numbers in, and that's where and how I view it. So I never.
Which is fine, actually. It's there to be a tool for your treasurers more than anything else, so that they're able to provide the information that y'all need.
Well, we have a treasurer this year who has not really been involved in NASPA in the past. She was as a young professional, and then she got more involved in enrollment management types of things, and has recently come back to NASPA. She was a treasurer in a different association, and she is very interested in revamping our budget and looking at, where we spend our money and what we can do and what new or different things we can do. And I don't know, I feel like we've gotten to a point where our budget's kind of locked down, and there's not really a whole lot of flexibility within our budget at all. I think it was a year or 2 or 3 years ago, even maybe, when we had the historical, there was a last minute request to have our historians go and do some research for us. And there was a lot of conversation about if we should have to pick up that bill to send our historians to get additional archived information. And, that's what, $1,000, something like that. But we've got a zero-based budget, and there was not really anywhere to pull that from. And so, it's interesting too when you bring in a new treasurer who's looking at things with a different set of eyes.
Yep.
But from our perspective, then it's like, well, there's no room. I don't know where we would do anything different.
Yeah. Shannon, we had the exact same issue because I'm going to Canadian Caucus next week. It was approved by the board several meetings ago. Again, it's getting drawn on reserves because the same thing, our spending categories are there's no contingency. And so that'd be good to see what we should be putting in contingency funds for those one-offs and things like that.
Mhm.
Right.
Great things for us to talk about.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like size of contingencies, for example.
I think, Candy, it would help. I would like to go topic by topic, because something that helps me just as much as seeing the number is hearing the rationale.
Right. Okay. Can I ask how many of us as RDs really get into the intact spreadsheets? Anybody? And how many of us as RDs are looking at like an Excel spreadsheet or a Google sheet? So it looks like.
I do from time to time.
Okay.
Work with our treasurer, Michael Allen's work.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, basically what we have is a balance sheet that shows our annual revenues and expenses.
Right. Yeah.
Google,
Yeah.
so whatever.
I was sharing with Amy and Nathan, I said, the analogy for me is like, when I was an AVP, and sure, the university business office has its accounts, but I keep my own basically set of books because, first of all, I can understand it because I set it up. And secondly, there's errors from time to time and I want something to check against it. So,
right.
But okay, well then maybe if we can each commit to, let me tell you, I also shared with Nathan and Amy that just by saying, okay, let's all commit to bring in our budget in July, my budget still needs some work. I mean, I've got, when I came into my position, there really wasn't an annual operating budget. It was run more like a checkbook, just in and out, in and out. And I'm trying to just develop a standardized annual operating budget. And there's a lot of just complexity even in that. So we're going to be talking about that at our advisory board meeting in a few weeks. So what I would say is if everybody could bring with you a document that, at least as far as you know to date, represents your regional budget, and then we can all begin to develop just a list of issues. We've already got that started in the document we gave to the board in March, but I'll just develop kind of an agenda of things that we want to talk about, and then we can go from there. Does that sound like a work plan? Okay, great. All right. I think that's it. Is that everything I had said I was going to cover?
Candy, can I ask a follow-up to, or maybe friendly amendment to what you just offered? Do you think it would be possible for you to, and there's already that starting list, and again, I've been taking some notes, that starting kind of area or that list of areas for the regions to respond to by our July meeting? So we're actually meeting one more time virtually before we're meeting in person, which I want to say is July 8th.
Sounds right.
So do you think maybe by that July 8th meeting, you can get out to the rest of the RDs? These are exactly, the list of areas.
I think so. Yep.
Just so then that would give the rest of the RDs the areas to focus on.
Right, and we can also then brainstorm what else we might want to add to that on the 8th. Okay. I will do that. Do we, in terms of a shared document, what software would we use if we were all working on a shared document?
Google. We could create a Google sheet.
Okay.
I think Google's the easiest for people to get account permissions for. I mean, you always do like someone's Office 365 account, but it's always messy.
Does that work for everybody if we all worked off of a Google Sheet doc? Okay.
That's good.
Is there any benefit in having it originate from like Nathan's account?
Yeah, Candy, I was going to offer, I'll make a document and then share with you and then share with the rest of the team and pop in what's already in the report.
Exactly. Yeah. Perfect. Great. Thank you.
Because I think there's actually, and I think we discussed this before, I think if I go back to Julie's original working document, I think there's other things that were in there Shannon, I know you noted a couple things that 4 West does, so I'll make sure to go through that information and then the other one as well.
And we might go ahead and start a section called things we want to share with each other, and then issues that we want to address. So for example, I know one of the things that came up last December was this idea of the shared reserves. So that might be under issues, speaker fees, volunteer compensation, et cetera, might be in the things we want to share. And there'll be some overlap. Okay, thank you.
I think the other thing that would be helpful also on that July meeting, and again, for those of you that aren't able to make it, feel free just to participate virtually beforehand, is there other information that would be helpful for y'all on again, to Chris's earlier point, maybe from a central office level, me reaching out to my other colleagues in association management to get a sense of how they work with their regional groups. And again, we can, if there's anything top of mind right now, or we could use that July meeting, just so Amy and I can have a couple weeks to prepare if you want year-over-year data or kind of anything in that nature.
Yeah, I think you know how this is my impression being the newer folk to this seat. Yeah, how the KCs and the membership coordinators are really taking off to the point where the RDs are kind of rotating off that monthly call and stuff like that. My thought was if there's any group that should be comparing notes that's not comparing notes right now, is the treasurers. And even my treasurer is very complimentary to our Stefan. He's basically said the same thing that you're saying. That like there's a lot of things that are getting cleaned up centrally to the point where they can have that conversation too now. So I just think that where our most fiduciary risk is with our budgets, right? So we should make sure they're working consistently too.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think wherever we land after our in-person meeting in July, I think that will help give Danny and I, working with Stefan and Olivia, some additional guidance for what areas do y'all want some additional collaboration versus where is it really important that the region still has the autonomy to manage how y'all would like to.
Yeah.
I have a sidelight financial question. Has anybody had success doing a no-frills regional conference? And I don't really mean a drive-in. I mean in place of a fall regional or spring regional conference. Something where it's basically all of the speakers are volunteer speakers, no keynotes, no meals provided, just basically doing everything that you can to go bare bones on it and reduce costs for members.
I've done a state conference like that when I was Kentucky State Director, but not a regional conference.
Helen, Grace, was it multiple days?
It was, no, it was one full day, but breakfast was kind of on your own, lunch was kind of on your own.
Right.
I also just recently hosted an ATICSA regional conference on our campus, and it was no frills. And it was 2 days.
Yeah, we just had a drive-in conference that our region co-sponsored it. So we put in, I think, $7,000. And then an institution put up some funding, and then a state association put up some funding for it as well. So the attendee cost was $25.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was only one day, but we had as many people come to that as come to our fall regional conference. And that just really raised the question of, whoa, are we missing the mark here a little bit as far as what we're providing, what we feel like we need to provide? Maybe we need to really assess what we're doing with our fall regionals. We've kind of always done it this way. Do we need to look at doing things a little bit differently?
Yeah, I would say South Carolina had a drive-in, and they had about 80 folks, and it was pretty no frills. And then when Kentucky did it, we had about 80 folks. And so we have twice that many or 3 times that many at our regional. So there's definitely interest. And I would say registration was the same. It was maybe like $25, $30. I know in Kentucky, that's what the registration was. I'd have to check on South Carolina. But yeah, it's, I would also offer, we had a free webinar for any regional member recently, and we had it back in April, and it's hard to know exactly how many people participated, because I know at most schools, folks I talked with, it was one office that sort of registered and everybody hopped on the call, but just like very loosely, I would guess 500 people participated in the webinar. I would guess. I don't have the data for that, but I would say given the institutions and then given the number of people I know, like we had 12 people at our institution alone. So there was really high demand and interest. It also was a phenomenal speaker. So Ellen Neufeld spoke, but it was great.
Yeah, I mean, this is a timely conversation because, again, we had this conversation at our meeting a couple weeks ago about, one, do we need to have a regional conference every year? And if we maybe can do it differently, do we need to have 50,000 different drive-ins? Looking at the calendar, we're talking about shrinking budgets and how do we make it more accessible? And so that's why we started thinking about, okay, maybe we can start to partner and deliver some of these professional development opportunities differently, like having our Wisdom Wednesday webinar series where people can start to connect. We've got Ring Central. I know that Bernard Little is looking into using that capability to host webinars and to tape them, just to think differently about how do we offer these opportunities, but making it really affordable and accessible to everyone.
Yeah, Shanna, I think the piece, because this was talked about at the T3 conference, is the partnership with the institution and how much I think that's a key in doing some of this no frills work, because how much can an institution offload, or are there schools that are in the area? I think all of y'all have those institutions or those areas. Tied with that though is then where is there access to those institutions that don't have funds? So for example, the large state schools might have the funding, but if it's important for the region to go to maybe a smaller school or a private institution, maybe in your budgeting processes, just keeping that in mind, and maybe you would fund more of that conference than other places.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for bringing this up, Shannon, because something that's always been perplexed on my mind too. To me, part of the question is like, is someone going to go to or not go to a conference because of the meals, right? And this is where I have to check my experience and privilege, right? Because that's the last thing I look at to see where the breakfasts and meals and lunch are being provided, right? But I'm not a grad student, right? So but then again, just because your travel is being supported, they could be very inventive of how they get food in an area too, right? So I appreciate what Shannon's saying, because outside national conferences, I've never really, whether it be regional within NASPA or someone else, thought I'm going there because of the keynote or something like that. Because some are very volunteer based and no frills. So,
and we're also competing against so many other opportunities, and that's what we're trying to drill down in. We've got state opportunities for individuals, and depending on what type of school, whether it's a private community college or a large public, you all may have state meetings or regional meetings to go to. And the calendar can fill up very quickly. You really could go to a professional development opportunity every week. And so how do we cut down on some of that redundancy to deliver the quality services? That's really our goal.
Right.
Yeah, we've even talked a little bit about, does it make sense to move our meeting from the fall to the summer? That way we could even get rooms on a college campus, like for people to stay in versus staying in hotels. So I don't know what we'll end up doing, if we'll blow things up or if it'll just be an engaging conversation. But we had, Helen Grace, I think 340 people ended up coming to that drive-in, which again, it's as many, if not even more, than come to our regional conference some years. So it was phenomenal. But again, you can't beat a $25, conference price. So.
And I think it goes back, and Chris, I think you were the one that was raising this, or maybe it was Candy when we were talking about Western Regional 2018. But I think there's larger conversations around the pricing model and pricing for your goals. And I remember, this was probably 6 years ago, I could maybe try to find the slides, but I remember going to a session exactly around thinking about what the goals are for your event, and then that driving your pricing model rather than breaking even. Because if you're really looking for, and I look at Western Careers and Student Affairs Day, I think they're able to get 500 because they recognize it's about access, it's about opportunity, and it's about spreading the word about the field as much as possible. I'm sure you could probably charge 100. I'm sure you'd still get the right people, but that would change then the demographic of who you're reaching. It would change the experience. So I think this conversation, Shanna, that you're raising around what is the right pricing model, I think does tie back to what's the goals of the conference. And I think NASPA in general, I think this in particular, but I'm feeling it particularly internally because of the reorg, but I think the conversations that y'all are having as a board are leading to this kind of rethinking what the organization is. And I think if nothing else, it's a great time to do that when we are healthy, when we are successful, when we do have reserves, kind of all of these different components and situationally where we are right now.
Yeah, we don't cannibalize each other, pardon the phrase, because, one of the things that has us
Right.
concerned 5, I don't know if it's a real concern or not, is every summer we have a standing June SSAO retreat, and the symposium in Baltimore I think the geography is going to be a different issue because it's in Baltimore, which is hard travel for a one day or for a lot of folks from the West Side. But I mean, if that symposium comes closer to the region, then we have concerns about what's going to happen to our summer retreat, which is historically attended by 40 to 50 of our senior officers.
Yeah, Chris, internally, I know that I'm working with Lauren Feldstern, who's our director of meetings, around sourcing and being intentional, because I do know that's been a concern.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be an issue this year, but if it gets closer, it probably would be an issue.
Yep, absolutely. Great. I did just have a quick regional board meeting follow-up. I guess it's not really follow-up if many of y'all haven't had your meetings yet. But I think as things come up or if there are conversations, please just drop Danny or I a note regarding things that you need or outcomes of your regional advisory board meetings. Any other things that are on top of mind for y'all in the last couple minutes together or things for our July meeting? So again, we will revisit continuing the RDTF work, no longer task force, but the work of regional directors. Also, Kimberly Lowry and Eddie Martinez, who's the incoming community college director, will be joining our July meeting. So again, as a follow-up, y'all were working with your regional advisory boards to talk about community college, specifically community college symposium. And then this revisiting conversation is just moving that plan forward a little bit more and thinking about that information. But again, if there are other agenda items or things that pop up, feel free to share now or drop me an email.
I have a very specific question about P-card spending limits, monthly spending limits for Amy and Nathan. So if someone has something more germane to the entire group, that'd be great. Or you want me to listen to my concern?
I wanted to ask a quick clarifying question, and I'm sorry that I missed the conversation a call or two back about the community college symposium's pre-regional conference, and I'll again own that I haven't listened to the tape, but I know that the community college division will be more involved in that. Is that to take place this fall?
So it's up to each region to decide, Candy. I think if a region, in particular fall ones, wanted to try to make one great. We recognize, though, there might need to be more planning. So I think similar to the IPKC representative on your conference committees, there's a want to try to do it this year, but the hope would be that everyone would buy next year.
Okay.
Yeah, I did ask my board about what their thoughts about that was. And the general consensus was part of the success of the regional community college things that we've done in our areas is because they've been able to tailor it to the specific needs of the region too. So they're open to the idea, but they wanted to just make sure there was that ability to have, whatever the sub-regional topics are, which could be, pretty pronounced in the community college system.
Right.
That there wasn't a kind of a washing away of the appeal of a regional event. That was their main thought.
So collaboration around the content is one of the ways I would say what Chris is also saying.
Right.
Absolutely, Candy. I think there's a want from the community college division to have it be as easy for y'all as possible. So that's why I think it is a little bit of a program in a box. In particular, though, for community colleges, but just in general, there's not this is the curriculum, you need to stick to this is the time, place, manner, etc. It's more just the facilitating the experience, and then each region can then decide what that actual experience looks like.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yep. Great. So if no other questions, Amy and I will hang on for Chris's P-card question, but thanks y'all for the call. And then again, I'll send the recording out and any action steps later this week.
Hey, everyone, I will be heading to Fargo on Wednesday, so I won't be on the national board call. If there is anything from that, I've sent an email to, Kevin and Denzel and Penny and Angela. But if there's anything from that you would bring up at your regional board meeting, if I would appreciate any kind of heads up. I don't think we'll have a recording in time for our meeting on Thursday, so just shoot me a text or an email or something if you hear anything that you're like, oh yeah, I would have wanted to know about that. Just share with my board.
Got it. Have fun in Fargo.
Yeah.
Woohoo.